Singwa salute. I'm Lord Maitreya, the hip hop futurist. You're now tuned into the Super Longevity Institute podcast. This evening at the Institute, I have a very special guest. He is a Dutch neuroscientist, a neuroengineer, and co-founder of carboncopies.org, the outreach and road mapping organization for advancing substrate independent minds. Between 2008 and 2010, he was the director of the Department of Neuroengineering at the Fratronic Technilia Institute in Spain, the third largest private research organization in Europe. He earned his PhD in computational neuroscience at the Department of Psychology at McGill University, and his master's in electrical engineering with a specialization in information theory at Delft University of Technology. He is the former professor at the Center for Memory and Brain of Boston University and is the co-founder of the Neuroengineering Corporation of Massachusetts. He established the minduploading.org website and first proposed the term and specific approach called whole brain emulation, the purpose which is the technological accomplishment of mind transfer to a different substrate. His professional research objective is the implementation of whole brain emulation, creating a large-scale, high-resolution representations and emulations of activity and neural circuitry that are needed in patient-specific neuroprosthesis. He is a member of the Oxford Working Group that convened in 2007 to create the first roadmap toward whole brain emulation. He has professional expertise in computational neuroscience, psychology, information theory, electrical engineering, and physics. He organizes neuroengineering efforts to obtain, replicate, function, structure information that resides in neural substrates for use in neuroprosthesis and neural interfaces. Ladies and gentlemen, hip hop futurists worldwide, Dr. Randal Koene. Thank you for coming to the Institute. I'm excited. I'm so excited.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
How did you? What got you in the field? When was the first time you knew you wanted to become a neuroengineer and a neuroscientist?
Oh, well, it took me a while to figure out that I wanted to be a neural engineer and neuroscientist. I I knew what I wanted to do in terms of what I wanted to achieve, but I didn't know how to achieve it. So I kind of started out just, looking around for the type of knowledge or the kind of understanding that I would need to be able to do this idea, to work on the idea of mind uploading, which, I came across more from science fiction than science fact, so more from that angle. And so, it's very hard to understand when you're just coming at it from science fiction what is doable and what isn't, or what matters and what doesn't. And speaking of matter, I thought that what mattered was matter, as in my dad was a physicist, and physicists look at matter, and they look at particles and subatomic particles, and they said, then you talk about how the whole universe is made up of those, and if you could only read off all of those particles and exactly where they are and put them where they're supposed to be, then wouldn't you have an exact copy? Wouldn't you be able to reconstruct something? I mean, we're familiar with this from Star Trek teleporters, for example, right? That's the idea. And so I started off thinking that was what I had to do. But of course, I was just a teenager. I had no idea. So I started studying physics. And pretty quickly, I started realizing that there's a whole bunch of tangential stuff there that had nothing to do with what I actually cared about. Because what I really cared about was the brain, was about this thing we have going on inside of us, this subjective experience of the world, right? And I have no clue where my atoms are right now. I don't know about that stuff. That's not part of my experience. My experience is how I feel, what I remember, my goals, all of that, right? And that goes on in the brain. So after trying my hand at physics and becoming frustrated, that's when I decided, well, I need to get into something that has more to do with the information in the brain. And because I was in the physics field, it didn't immediately occur to me to switch over to neuroscience. In fact, I thought, well, why don't we go through AI? And the best way to do AI at the time was to go into the field of information theory that
Mm,
was being given at the Department of Electrical Engineering of this technical university. So I did my master's there. But
mm,
if you ask me to design an electric circuit or to do anything on high power stuff or whatever, I wouldn't have a clue.
mm,
Um, I it's all just the only thing I really did there was study AI,
right.
information, neural networks, that sort of thing. And then I
What
took that to do my PhD in computational neuroscience.
what can you tell my audience, because they might not be familiar, what information theory really is, and can you break that down in layman terms for my audience, because I want them to get a clear understanding of of what we're talking about, and I don't want to lose anyone.
Yeah,
Can you?
yeah.
Mhm,
Information theory is about signals. And a signal is something that tells you something you didn't know before.
mm,
So, for example, if someone is constantly knocking, then you're not learning anything because that knocking is always going on.
mm,
But if somebody sometimes knocks and sometimes doesn't, then there's probably some information there. It's kind of like how we listen to the stars and we're listening
mm,
for signals that are unusual to find out if some information is in there. Maybe there's an alien species somewhere.
mm,
Um, so, information theory is all about that. It's about that difference between what you knew now and what you could know afterwards. And the difference between those things is it's calculated in something that you've probably heard of in bits.
mm,
So you have so many bits of information. And yeah, that's really what it's about. And everything else is just, well, what are you applying the signal to? So what's carrying the signal? How are you encoding the signal?
mm,
What type of information are you trying to transmit with the signal? That's just what the rest is. But
right.
the core is just knowing something you didn't know before.
Mm,
And so when it comes to the brain or who we are, really the information is that which makes us uniquely who we are and
right.
which contributes to that experience that we have inside of us,
Mm,
that internal experience. That's the relevant information there. That's why I don't care which atom exactly is doing that. I could
mm,
encode the location of that atom,
right.
but I don't need to know. I don't
Mm,
even need to know which neuron in my brain is doing something. I don't really need to know that either.
mm,
I just need to know that it's going to be able to remind me of, I don't know, the vacation that I had. Gosh knows it's been a pandemic, so there's no vacation.
no,
Uh,
but I get the no, but I definitely understand what you're
whenever
saying.
ages ago.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
definitely get it.
yeah.
Um, you started a non for profit called Carbon Copies. What's the goals of Carbon Copies, and can you break down what whole brand emulation is? And well, let me back up. Can you just break down what mind uploading is? Because I know that some people who are
Yeah.
just not really into transhumans and they're not into science like that, they might not even know what mind uploading is, or the only experience they might have had is in the 80s. You had Lawnmower Man. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
That
remember
was
that.
one of my favorite movies in the 80s. Lawnmower Man, the Reanimator. I'm sorry, that's what got me into this stuff. One of the reasons was I got into transhumanism.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then you had the Matrix. So people, Hollywood does
Oh
a
gosh, The
poor
Matrix.
job
Yeah,
of educating people on these subjects.
The Matrix. We're all being held there to be batteries. What a
Yeah,
strange concept.
that's right.
Why batteries?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
don't think people know what mind uploading is. They only know from they only know from these Hollywood movies. Can you just break down what mind uploading is,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then go
sure,
into what
sure.
yeah
Yeah.
what carbon copies does and what it's about, and what whole brain emulation is?
Yeah, yeah. So mind uploading is something, as an idea in science fiction, it's been around
Mm,
definitely for many decades, and I guess maybe that you could even go way back and consider some really older literature to be about mind uploading, when when you can inhabit or possess some other being with yourself, I guess. But
mm,
mind uploading, strictly speaking, in sci-fi is about a person who is in a human body, has a human brain, and then they undergo some procedure. Maybe some kind of a scanning machine is involved,
Mm.
and then their mind, so their self, as in all their memories and their characteristics, the person who they are, ends up transferred into something else. And maybe that something else is a robot, or maybe it's a big computer where you're in a virtual world,
Mm.
or maybe it's another biological body if you can reconstruct one like that, right? It could be
Right.
something else. But the whole point is about this transfer of the person, of the essence of that person's inner experience to something else. So not
Mm.
the person's body, not the person's spine or whatever, but that experience.
Mm.
And well, why don't we just use that word? Why do we talk about whole brain emulation and that other term that you used, substrate independent
Substrate
minds?
independent minds, definitely.
Um, so mind uploading is a talks about an objective, a
Mm.
desire. It's like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we could, have a robot body tomorrow, and then the other
Mm.
day I'll have a biological body, and then I'll be like a swarm of mini robots or something.
Mm.
Wouldn't it be cool? But it doesn't talk about what you're really trying to do, or it's very imprecise. And so
Mm.
people don't really know what that means. They can't really imagine what that means. Maybe they're thinking of teleporters where the entire body is being brought somewhere else.
Mm.
So, whole brain emulation is an attempt to use terms that are at least more precise in the sense that they talk about the brain. So the
Mm.
brain, you know, with the assumption that we make as neuroscientists at this time, that what we consider essential about our subjective experience is being generated by the brain. So the brain
Right.
is the essential thing that contains that data. And whole, as in it's the whole thing. It's not just about, say, a neuroprosthetic where you repair a piece of the brain or something like that. And emulation is the term that we borrowed from, the way you do computer emulation.
Mm-hmm.
Like you
Mm-hmm.
can you can be playing an old Nintendo Game Boy on your PC or something like that, or you could have a Mac emulator on a PC, or vice versa. And the idea of an emulator is that if it's a good emulator, then the programs you're running should run exactly as expected, even though they're running on a different machine, and the
Mm.
experience of using that program should be exactly the same. So here the idea is a whole brain emulation. If you can emulate precisely what that brain, this matter that was generating yourself and your
Mm.
experience somewhere else, then that should also generate yourself, your experience, all
Right.
of that. And so it's a more sort of technological description of what it could be.
Mm.
And then the term substrate independent minds, which I actually don't use very often because it's too much of a mouthful, and it's easy to get it confused with whatever. People
Mm.
might think, oh, substance independent or something
Mm.
like that, which
Yeah.
is an entirely different thing.
Mm.
But substrate independent minds was then meant to be a more descriptive term of what you end up in. So again, taking the objective, like with mind uploading, like with that term,
Mm.
but then being a bit more descriptive about it, saying, okay, what does it really mean? Well, we're really talking about the mind
Mm.
being this thing that's being generated by the brain. Let's make a separation here: brain
Right.
being the machine, and mind being that which is there when the machine is on.
Right.
And substrate independent didn't mean that you don't need a substrate. It's not like you're a ghost. It just
Mm.
means that kind of like platform independent code. You can run it on this, and you can run it on that and on that.
Right.
So you can keep upgrading that brain. That's what that was
Mm.
about. Yeah.
Wow. No, I get it. Wow. Thanks for explaining that. This reminds me. I don't know if you ever heard of that guy named. I think his name was Dr. White, and he took the monkey brain and put it on another monkey's brain in Russia, and then the Pope asked him, "So what happens to consciousness?" He said, "I guess it could be transplanted." And I just was familiar about these type of uh uh studies that he did, and a couple of years ago. I didn't know anything about Dr. White, who was a neuroscientist too. He was a he did surgery, neurosurgeon. He was a neurosurgeon from Ohio, and I seen that, and it just blew my mind because I never even thought the monkey lived for a few minutes, for a few seconds or a few minutes, and it seemed like it had sensation. It probably was in the worst condition because it was in a new body. It was just like
Mm.
transplanting the head to a new body. But I know that this is not totally correlates with what you're doing, but it just reminds me of that type of work that Dr. Wright was doing for some reason. But this
Yeah,
thing with consciousness, do you, I mean, if you transfer well, I know that the scientist premise is that the mind is an abstraction of the brain, right? That the mind comes from the brain, is generated by the brain. So,
sure.
but
Yep.
um, how does I mean, does this question of consciousness ever, like, how do you transfer? You say the mind, but isn't it the consciousness? What's the that needs to be transferred also with the mind? I'm confused.
Hmm. Yeah, it's very confusing,
Hmm.
especially when we're used to using all of those terms like personal
Hmm.
identity and consciousness in a very hand wavy manner. We
Right.
just kind of say, "Oh yeah, I'm conscious right now."
Hmm.
What does that really mean? What's the difference between conscious and not conscious?
Hmm.
And what is, can a rock be conscious and a human be conscious, and can everything be conscious or no?
Hmm.
Um, Now, of course, you've got the medical terminology, right? You've got a clinician who can come up and say, well, this patient is minimally conscious.
Hmm.
And what they mean is they're not responding.
Right.
They're not aware enough that they can respond to your questions and move something or something like that.
Hmm.
But even if they can't respond, we've found that if you can now, when you use fMRI, you can actually tell that some of the people where we thought that they were in a vegetative state are actually in a locked in state, which means they're actually conscious, but they can't move a muscle. And so they can hear you, they just can't respond.
Hmm.
If they're lucky, they might be able to blink an eyelid or something, but some can't at all.
Hmm.
And then they found out after this study, they decided they have to treat a lot of those patients very different than the really vegetative state patients. So even from a medical perspective, it's very difficult to deal with consciousness.
Hmm.
But when you get into the philosophy of it, like what is consciousness,
Hmm.
then you have to start really trying to determine what we're talking about here. Because people sometimes treat consciousness as if you could separate it from things like memory.
Hmm.
That's when people, for instance, take that as like the seat of consciousness is like, I don't know, it's the soul.
Yeah.
And then the soul would be this thing that survives the body and that can transfer to somewhere else, like
Hmm.
heaven or whatnot, and somehow does that without the brain, where the synapses are encoding the memories. So if you take away all your memories and all your characteristics, like for say a concert pianist, the way that they play a piano piece, or the experiences you've had that have colored the way that you perceive uh, people that you meet, or the way that you see a certain type of flower or something like that. When you take all of that away, which is in your memory, then what is left?
Hmm.
I mean, that's what it's very hard to imagine that sort of soul, that sort of consciousness without memory. Like if you take away the brain that has all of those patterns in there, and if you
Hmm. That's
don't
a good
have
point.
that brain, that matter there, then what is supporting those memories?
Hmm.
As a scientist, we're not saying that magic can't exist. It's just that if we can't point to it, if we can't carry out an experiment that shows, okay, this is the case with the magic, this is the case without the magic, and we can see the difference. If we can't do that,
Hmm.
then we have to use Occam's razor and posit that it's not there, or that we
Right.
can't at least say anything intelligible about it, anything scientific.
Hmm.
So that's first of all. And then when we're thinking about what is consciousness that we care about from the perspective that we think about it,
Hmm.
this is something that I personally have a bit of a pet peeve about because of all the various theories of consciousness that are
Yeah.
out there.
Hmm.
Some of them don't seem to talk about that.
Hmm.
And I don't want to point any fingers and make people look bad, because some of these people are my friends and
Right.
are colleagues in a sense. But, there's Professor Tononi and Professor Koch out there who talk about integrated information theory as
Hmm.
a version of consciousness theory. And what they do is they look at connections in the brain and they do a calculation over all of those so that they can give a number that tells you something about how well this system can integrate information
Hmm.
by having all these parallel connections. Okay, great. So we have a number.
Hmm.
Interestingly, you can do that same calculation over various other things, like, say, a star. If you do that for a star, you get a very high number. It makes it sound as if a star is really conscious,
Hmm.
very, very conscious. Meanwhile, you could do the same sort of thing for um, parts of your brain that are much more organized, much less sort of a haywire bunch, or you could do it for um, artificial intelligence, where the machinery that's there can do really smart things like sorting which car type they see or something. But because of the way the matrix is arranged and it's very regular, you're in a very low number, so very low consciousness.
Mm.
So what's this number really saying? And also, why do we really care about that number? If it says anything,
Mm.
it's really only talking about like a resource that needs to be there, some minimal thing that you need to be able to have a conscious mind, like the ability to integrate lots of different parts of what's going on in your mind,
Mm.
vision and sound and feelings and all that stuff, right? So that is a
Mm.
minimum resource that you need for it, but it doesn't really explain why consciousness feels the way that it does.
Mm.
And why does human consciousness probably feel different than, say, the consciousness of a mouse or of a bat or of a dog? And those questions, the real questions about why is our subjective experience the way it is,
Right.
I find that other theories treat those better. Like, for
Mm.
instance, attention schema theory by
Mm.
Michael Graziano. That's an example of a consciousness theory where they get into that. Like, okay, by focusing, by having a way of making attention move around in your brain, that's how
Mm.
you get this experience where you're aware of this, you're aware of that, you have this
Right.
stream of consciousness experience, right?
Mm.
But you can tell that no matter which way these are going, they're all still tying back into the material brain and theories about that. Because when scientists talk about consciousness, I mean scientists in the sort of, like neuroscientists, that
Mm.
area, they really want to talk about things they can test. So whether it's integrated information theory, where you can count connections, or attention schema theory, they always want to tie it back to that. Whereas
Mm.
if you talk to a philosopher, they can go in very different directions,
Right.
because they can start thinking about questions such as qualia, and whether qualia are different from one person to another. Like, is my red different than your
Right.
red? And is there a further fact, like, besides all of these connections in the brain and how they generate our ability to see and hear, um, is there something else, something beyond that, that makes it so that you can be conscious and aware? And even beyond, like, in attention schema, this idea of having a model of yourself that's talking
Mm.
to itself and giving yourself output and making yourself say things like cogito ergo sum, which
Mm.
is, a spoken set of words that are the product of processes in my brain, which make me think that I'm saying something about what I'm experiencing right now, but those processes already happened in the past. So I'm making a statement about the past. So really,
Mm. I get your point.
I was thinking, therefore I am.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so philosophers will keep on asking questions, no matter whether there's something you can actually point to, something tangible to
Right.
unwind, and that
Right.
that can be difficult. Not
Mm.
wrong, but difficult. Um, so yeah, it often boils down in the end to how far can you take sort of a rational discussion about consciousness and about things like personal identity. That's
I
another
was
one
gonna
that's
get to that.
wrapped up in
Yeah.
that very often.
Yeah.
And when you do that, when you take that conversation all that way, do you end up at a place where you've actually learned something new, where you could say, oh, that was a mistake, this was something I wasn't thinking before?
Mm.
Or are you just getting to a point where you're saying, oh, okay, I see how I think this way with this rational chain, and you're thinking that way, and that's why we have a difference of beliefs?
Mm.
And beliefs are, well, they're beliefs. they're
Right.
they're not, you know uh, evidence or the result of an experiment or something. They're what you believe.
Mm. I asked that question because I know people gonna hit me up and say, "Well, Maitreya, he's talking about the mind. What about consciousness?" People are gonna, they're gonna hit me with that later. I know I'm gonna hear that later. Um,
Yeah, feel free to keep asking about things
yeah, I
like
know
that
I'm
that
gonna.
you're
I
bothered by,
know.
because I know I kind of go off on a long
No,
trip
that's
there, because
fine. No,
I've
that's
had so
fine.
many discussions about consciousness lately that there's a whole bunch of stuff stuck in my head right now about, oh,
Mm.
and this is the path we went down, and that was the problem that you ran into. And but
No, that's
sometimes you have to take me back to like
no. It's
really
all
basic
no,
stuff that I should be talking about.
no. It's all good. It's all good. What is reverse engineering the brain for people who don't know anything about technology or science or nothing about? Can you break down what's reverse engineering the brain? Because when I was reading literature, I'm pretty sure people don't know what that means.
Well, if you reverse engineer a computer chip, for instance, then you'll take the chip that you found somewhere, maybe you stole it from your competition, and you attach it to some lead so that you can run a bunch of ones and zeros across it and see how the chip reacts, and then you'll open it up and you'll use a microscope to read out all the pathways of where the chip's pieces connect. And if you do that enough, then you can start making a model where you're writing out mathematical equations that explain what the chip is doing. And if you've done it for the whole chip completely, then you should be able to go and make your own Chinese knockoff and be able to
Mm,
beat your competition with your version of the chip.
mm,
Now, reverse engineering the brain is this basic same idea. It's you use electrodes or calcium imaging and various other techniques to do recording of activity in the brain. This is just like the ones and zeros we were talking about before to see how
mm,
parts of the brain are behaving. You take an electron microscope to scan the brain at very high resolution to see where all the paths are going, all the connections between the different neurons. And if you see all of that and you have a good enough understanding of neuroscience, so how all the parts are supposed to work, then, going forward in time to a future time when we can do this, then you
mm,
should be able to build another version of that brain based on everything you've just reverse
mm.
engineered.
Thank you. Yeah, wow. Um, I also seen you talk about neuroprosthesis. Um, what you know, my father has Parkinson's, so when you say neuroprosthesis, I'm always thinking about what how that might help. If he had something in his brain that can help him move again. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because he doesn't have control over his movements anymore. He can't move anymore. And I was thinking when you said neuroprosthesis, um, because the brain is so complex, and how do you replicate those functions in the brain? That do you think that science will be able to replicate the functions of the brain that will make people with Parkinson's move again? That's what I'm asking.
I think they will. By the way, does your dad have a deep brain stimulation electrode?
No.
No. Okay, because some Parkinson's disease patients get those um,
Mm,
to combat tremors that you get as a result of the medication and the treatment and the disease itself. And
mm,
so sometimes that can be helpful. It's kind of like a pacemaker in the brain that keeps things going at a certain rhythm. Um, that's one example of where a neural interface can do a good thing, but it's not quite the same as a neuroprosthesis because a neuroprosthesis is typically something a little more advanced where you have to decode something that you're reading out of a part of the
mm.
brain and compute that and then re-encode and attach back into the brain
Right.
to get it to do something. So most of those are still very much in the sort of early stages. Not all of them, though.
Mm,
A very popular prosthesis that is actually also a neuroprosthesis is the cochlear implant.
yeah.
So these devices for people who are deaf, especially deaf children, people
Mm,
born deaf, and they seem to work pretty well. The retinal implant is also coming along, so for blind
mm,
people. And you can tell that these are all things that are kind of on the periphery, right? They're on the outside in the sensory area. And that's because it's much easier to build a device that does what you want it to do when you know at least what one side means, right? You
mm.
know what the sound is you're hearing, you know what
Right.
the thing you're supposed to see is. It's much harder if you're working in the brain, deep in the brain, between different regions of the brain where okay, so you're receiving some kind of code of activity from neurons, and there's another set of codes they're supposed to come on the out on the other side, but you don't know what any of them mean. So
Mm,
how are you going to do that? Then you have
right.
to do that reverse engineering thing where you have to map out everything that's going on in that area to
Mm,
build the prosthesis. Um, but they will be very useful as we become more, you know, as we get to be build more sophisticated versions of them
mm,
and as the surgery also gets less invasive and
mm,
safer to install them and you
mm,
don't need to replace them as often and that sort of thing because those factors those questions are all major reasons why it's not something that's been widely adopted except in extreme cases like
mm.
say paraplegics or people who are completely locked in where they just want to regain some function so that they can
Mm,
communicate with the outside world. They're usually happy to be volunteers test out these new technologies. But typically it's still the kind of function, the degree of function you get back isn't high enough, and the risk of the surgery is often too high in comparison with that, that it's not yet a normal medical device, but eventually it will be. So we're going to see that, and that's when you will see devices that can restore lost function. And I know that Parkinson's is definitely on the list of those main deficits that are candidates that people want to find a solution for. The deep brain stimulation electrode does something, but it doesn't really replace the dopaminergic neurons. So
Right.
there's still that part that needs to be repaired. Um, but yeah, I think so. I just can't really say exactly how long this is going to take.
Right.
Are we talking about the first neuroprosthesis being in use in 10 years, or is it 15 or 20? But it's those kind of time scales we're talking about here.
Mm. Um. Why? Why is it important for us to gain the ability to transfer the mind from its biological container to an artificial one?
Why is anything important? Sorry, that's a bad quip. It's
That's
just,
okay.
getting really philosophical and saying nothing matters, nothing really matters objectively.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
but
don't need it. We
yeah,
get it.
but why should you do it? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So for me, the main reasons why I think it's interesting is because when you have access to everything that goes on in your brain,
Mm.
then uh, you can learn from it and you can extend it. And that's interesting for many reasons. Now the obvious one is backup. Basically, it's like you make
Mm.
sure that you're stored somewhere, and therefore you don't just die when you're run over by a bus or something like that, right?
Mm.
So this idea of, wait, documents that are really valuable, we have procedures for taking care of those. If our brain is really valuable to us, why don't we take care of ourselves the same way?
Mm.
That idea comes up pretty quickly. But then there are other reasons too. So, for example, we are well evolved to live in the current time and with our current challenges, or maybe challenges from, in the Pleistocene era when we evolved,
Mm.
um, and and here on Earth in sort of the environment that exists. But we're not necessarily perfectly adapted for living in the vacuum of space or under hard radiation, or when you have to travel somewhere for 3,000 years. We're also not perfectly adapted for working with the situation where you have machines that are responding and reacting and creating information at the rate of microseconds and nanoseconds, when our fastest response time is about a tenth of a second.
Oh, I see.
So
Right.
that entire world at the faster speed doesn't even exist to us, right? That universe, we don't even see it.
Mm.
Only our machines can see that.
Right.
And we're not necessarily perfectly well suited for challenges like actually remembering things. Our memory
Mm.
is surprisingly not real, as in the
Mm.
way that human memory works is that we keep on pushing everything through filters, and we
Mm.
keep making these schemas of what we see the world is like,
Mm.
and everything gets filtered through that. And
Mm.
then when we retrieve a memory, we're not really retrieving like a photograph or an audio sample or something like that. No, it's not
Mm.
like that. It's We're taking these schemas, these samples, these templates of how the world works. We remember a bit about the event that happened and how those sorts of schemas were involved,
Mm.
and then we reconstruct something that seems like a likely version of what may have happened, which is why,
Right.
witness testimony is totally unreliable, for instance.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I
It's
see.
Yeah, and it's the same sort of thing. Like our memories are a reconstruction, they're a construct, and they're only a
Mm.
construct of the things that we were aware of, noticed, that we maybe had an emotional attachment to, and therefore they ended up being stored, and a whole bunch of details are
Mm.
missing. So memory is already an interesting case in that sense. And then you've got things like our ability to do probabilities in our head and to estimate what's going on and really sort of have a good judgment. This gut feeling that we often have is, it works well enough with tigers, maybe, but I'm not sure if it
Mm.
works well enough with every other situation where you have to have a
Mm.
good instinct, a good sort of estimation of what's going on.
Wow.
So in short, uh, we're pretty awesome. Our
Mm-hmm.
bodies are awesome. Our brains, our thoughts are awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic, really.
Wow.
But we're not everything.
Right.
And this is where mind uploading and whole brain emulation really differs from most other approaches to things like, say, life extension.
Mm.
Mostly when you talk about, okay, how could you live for 300 or 400 years if you wanted to? We're talking about something like stem cell therapy, gene therapy, telomere extension, that sort of thing. It's about living the way you are, your body, your experiences, all kind of the same thing. It's still you in whatever that future is, with whatever fantastic
Mm.
androids are running around doing whatever they're doing. It's still you,
Right.
um, and that's cool.
Mm.
Some people will want that, I'm sure. But mind uploading is about something different. It's really about more. It's more like, in that sense, it's more like genomics and DNA,
Mm.
sequencing and synthesis. In that, it's more about learning about something, being able to totally understand and control that, and
Mm.
also being able to tweak and improve and change and
Right.
explore. Like, you could try out some new part of how you would like your brain to work, and if you don't like it, you undo it because you
Right.
have a backup. But that's
Mm.
really different. So it's really about this opportunity for more exploration, for more things to be
Oh, I see what
possible, for
you're saying.
us to be part of that, so that it's
Right.
not just our machines that experience those things, right?
Right.
It's not just our computers that can tell us, oh, yeah, the universe is cool. I love going out there because my robotic body doesn't care about the vacuum, and I can
Mm.
see x rays, and I can think so fast. So it's really cool. You guys should try it someday. And
Mm.
meanwhile, we're stuck, being our ape selves, our
Right.
little. Yeah. Very happy to be kind of just a little better than Neanderthals, maybe, but yeah, here
Definitely.
we are.
I agree. Um, when we have the ability to, you know what I remember. All right, let me back up. The first time I got exposed to you was at the Global 2045 conference at Lincoln Center years ago.
Oh yeah, I
Are you
think that
still
was
involved with them?
2013. Yeah.
I think it was 2013. Yeah, I was there.
Mhm.
I was at that conference, and that's the first time I heard you speak. And what was your involvement with the Avatar 2045 project? Because that was a very ambitious. I looked at it, I said, "Whoa!" I
Oh
was
yeah.
blown away. I said,
Oh yeah.
"Wow."
It was definitely ambitious.
It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
very ambitious, and I was like, "Wow!" I was it definitely. I was very curious about it, and I seen what they was doing. I was like, "Wow!" I was very interested. Um, are you still a part of that project, the
I'm.
Avatar project, and where
I
is that
guess.
at today?
I guess passively, as in, I think Dmitry Itzkov is still. I consider him a friend,
Mm-hmm.
and the movement still exists, at least online and on paper.
Mm.
And I think I'll always be aware if something's going on there.
Mm.
But I haven't really seen much happen for the last few years. I think
Mm.
that Dimitri's been occupied with something else. I don't know
Mm.
what exactly.
Wow.
Um, so I don't know. It seems to have stalled out. Yeah.
Oh man, such a. I was so excited about that. I was like, wow. Um. Oh, what some of the technology? All right. So uploading the mind to different substrates. When I think about the Avatar project and some of their goals, and I think about what Elon Musk is doing with the Neuralace, will we be what what the technology today? Up, can we have some type of form of uploading today? Like, can we be
How
on a
long is
mind?
today? Is
Can your
today just
mind
this
have a
moment, or is today
independent
like
substrate today
the
with the
next so many
technology today?
years? Um, so by today, you mean with whatever technology is available
Available
right
with
now
all the
in a
stuff we
lab
know
or
today.
wherever, right?
Yeah.
We could probably have, with enough study, like we can use the technology that's available today, and
Mm.
then apply a bunch of time, a bunch of human time studying and working on, we could probably achieve a fruit fly whole brain emulation.
Well,
And
it's
I
a
say
start.
that
Got to start
because that's
somewhere.
actually something where the brain has been completely mapped now,
Mm,
and where I think it's not too big for us to handle in terms of coming up with the right mathematical models and running things on computers. So, in terms of the technology available today, that is what we can achieve. Um,
mm,
you know, putting in a bunch of, I don't know, students and whatever working on it, but we could probably achieve that.
mm,
It still wouldn't be easy. Um, just to give you, a point of comparison, the Allen Institute, that's the one founded by Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft.
yeah, I know.
Um, that institute recently published a fantastic paper in Nature,
Mm,
and that paper was about an electron microscope scan of a cubic millimeter of mouse brain.
mm,
That scan was done at a resolution of 3.5 nanometers. That's a resolution high enough that you can see the little vesicles that contain neurotransmitters in your synapses, which means that if you count them, you can get an idea for how strong they are. And how strong they are can tell you what patterns are encoded, so the type of memory that you have in there.
mm.
That's the level that you'd love to get to. And doing this at 3.5 nanometers for 1 cubic millimeter took them 5 months
Oh,
of running
wow.
6 electron microscopes 24/7. Now, the brain, the human brain, is 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters,
Mm,
not a millimeter by a millimeter by a
right.
millimeter. So we're talking, you know, another 100 times 100 times 100.
Mm,
So that's what, a million times more?
right.
So if that took them 5 months, if you were to multiply that by a million, yeah, we're talking longer than human history.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
that
yeah.
long. So the technology has to improve. And
Right.
not to like make anyone despair. The
Mm,
difference is this cubic millimeter was completely unachievable 2 years before that,
right.
because that was completely out of scope. And the next plan is the entire mouse brain. And that's because the rate at which you can do these scans is increasing exponentially. It's getting way better, way faster.
Oh, the
So
scanning techniques is
even
getting more
though
powerful.
it's getting way more powerful.
Okay.
So it's not as if, getting to twice as big means taking twice as long and we're just going to have to wait. No, it is going to get much faster
Mm,
and better. It's just that today we simply can't handle something that size yet.
right.
That's why the Drosophila, the fruit fly.
Right. Yeah, I guess you go up the evolutionary ladder to more. Right. Okay. I
Yeah.
get it. I'll get it. All right. Wow. All right. Wow. Well, well, when we are able to upload our brains and have an independent substrate mind, would that help us live longer? Of course, I gotta ask that more
Yeah,
specifically.
sure.
Like
Yeah.
I seen in the Avatar project, they were talking about transforming the brain in the Avatar body, and I was like, "How's that?" And then they went up and talked about a hologram transform. I was like, "Wow, this is
Some of
way
these
out."
things got pretty wild.
That was
Like I
really
I'm
wild.
I was only involved with the Avatar C part of it, which is the
Okay,
one where you take a brain and you put it into an artificial brain, right? You put
right.
the self into an artificial brain.
Mm,
This whole thing about how you get that into a hologram, that has more to do with Dimitri's personal spiritual beliefs than anything else, because he
mm,
really thought substrate independent, as in no substrate. It's
yeah, I
just
was like, yeah,
holograms. It's just
no platform.
nothing, right? And that's because he comes to it from a Vedic Hindu
That makes sense.
spiritual belief. So for
Mm,
him, of course, there is such a thing as kind of a higher plane of consciousness,
right.
and you can exist there. And then the idea was, well, the basic idea, the whole concept behind the 2045 movement was, okay, if you're a guru and you sit inside of a mountain cave for 30 years, then you can come up with enough enlightenment that you could change yourself or the world to what you want it to be, and you can get there. But not everybody has that time and is able to do that. Most people are busy with their normal lives.
Right.
So we need to make technology that makes it possible for people to get to that plane of enlightenment. That was where
Mm,
it was coming from. And
mm,
so he came from that spiritual belief and found his way towards this scientific ambition of doing whole brain emulation.
Mm.
But on the science side, we really only go to Avatar C, the one where
Mm.
you're doing artificial brains. This whole hologram thing,
Yeah, that was
I have no idea what that means.
okay. I'm glad you cleared that up because I was like, whoa, this is. I was like, this is out. I don't know. I was like, this is out there. I had to ask about that. Um, how long you think it would take us? I hate to ask because I know people hate that, but for my audience, if they want to hear how long that would take for us to be able to transfer the mind to an avatar body, and you know what? How would this avatar body even look like? What would it be made of? This,
It's
this,
it's very tall and blue because we saw the movies, right? That's
yeah, like,
no. Okay, so you had the time question and you have the what would it look like question, right?
yeah. What would the body
Uh,
be made of? That we're putting this what we what what would it be made of? Like we say a body, but I'm like, what
yeah,
type of body are we talking about?
yeah. It's
Mm.
hard to not to like really picture this without having some kind of image of what you would look like, what
Yeah.
you could be, right? And then it's not good enough to just say, oh well, you can choose. You can either be in virtual reality, or you can be in a robotic body, or you
Mm.
can have some kind of synthetic biology body.
Mm.
That's all cool, and then we think of either the synthetic biology robots from Aliens,
That's what
or
comes to
the
mind when people see stuff like or hear stuff like that.
yeah,
Hollywood
or Data from Star Trek as the
data
android, as that kind of
data.
a body, or my personal favorite, the Cylons from Battlestar Galactica. Not only because their bodies are at least as good as ours,
Yeah.
but also because they had mind uploading.
Yeah.
If you remember, they
I
I
do.
don't know if you saw the whole thing, but did
No, I
you
do.
watch that?
Yeah, that was a long time ago. I
It was a
was
long time ago. Yeah, it was
that
like 2004 or something.
was a
But
long time.
I love the show because they actually showed
Oh, you mean the
one
reboot of
culture. The
Battle
reboot, yes,
the
the
reboot?
reboot.
I'm
Yeah, yeah.
thinking of you say I'm thinking of the 80s.
No. The reboot of
Oh,
Battlestar
okay.
Galactica. Yeah.
That's what I went back to the
Um,
80s when you said Battlestar
did
Galactica.
you happen to see that the reboot?
No, I didn't. I've
Not
never
yet.
seen the
Oh well, then
reboot.
if you're interested in mind uploading, you should probably see it.
I will.
Not just because it's also a good show, where it's not clear who's good and who's bad, but
Mm,
the super fantastic robots in there, the Cylons, they that have bodies that look like human bodies,
mm,
they don't really die. When they die, they are reborn in another body like that, and their consciousness, their
mm,
thoughts, their mind, their memories has been quickly uploaded over to that new body,
mm.
which is basically exactly the idea of mind uploading.
Wow.
So it's very cool to see. So I like their version of a body in a sense, but
Mm,
yeah, and then you have of course examples from science fiction about what it's like to have a virtual body. We see that in the show Upload, for instance,
mm,
and in many others. All of those are possible, but I think because the technology of building bodies, of building robotics, making robots, and making other forms of bodies is, when you look at the scientific and technology level, not as complicated as whole brain emulation itself. It's
mm.
it's less complicated. So by the time you have whole brain emulation, the types of bodies you can get are probably going to be pretty darn sophisticated. So
Right.
you shouldn't worry about losing the sort of sophistication that you have right now, right? You should
Mm,
still be able to feel everything and be able to hear probably better than you do right now, and
mm.
that sort of thing. Plus you can replace parts. um
Wow.
but yeah, so the timing, right? How long
Mm,
is it going to take us to get there? Yeah, so the way I like to answer, because obviously this stuff is very uncertain, right? There's
mm.
so many uncertainties in science and in engineering, because you can always bump into a hurdle and then it takes longer, or they cut off the funding and suddenly you don't get that,
Right.
or the reverse, China suddenly decides they want to be the ones to run whole brain emulation, so they dump a whole bunch of funding into it, and
Yeah.
we get it really fast, but the government's watching everything you think.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there are many different possible outcomes, but what I tend to say is that because of how complicated it is, no matter
Mm,
how much money someone pours into it, no matter how many people they put into it, I would be beyond surprised if it took something like 20 or 30 years to get there. I would eat a number of hats if that were the case. But on the flip side, when you just look at how much has happened in the last 100 years, where we came from,
Mm,
and you look at how it continues to accelerate, how we're constantly, this like the scanning thing about the brain that I was talking about, how that accelerates kind of exponentially. And if you look at that, and if you imagine at least or hope that humanity doesn't completely stumble, so we continue to have a worldwide economy,
right.
worldwide science, and the social climate is such that these sort of things are possible, that it's not, that we're not just at war with one another the whole time.
Mm,
Assuming that we manage that, then I'd be equally surprised if it took us more than 100 years to figure out
mm,
enough about the brain to be able to do a whole brain emulation of a human, especially since, we could probably do one of the fruit fly if we put a
mm,
few years of hard work into it.
mm,
Um, so somewhere in there, somewhere between there, and hopefully closer instead of further away. But that's the range I put it. And I know that for people worrying about how long can I live to be there for this, that can
mm,
be frightening to think that what if it's 100 years?
mm,
And then we could talk about brain preservation or Alcor and stuff like
mm,
that. But even if you just set that aside for a moment, if you for a moment don't just think about yourself, don't just think about your own life and extend,
right.
how long can you live, but just think about humanity for a moment.
Mm,
If you think about it that way, compared to the whole history of humanity, if you go back to like 2000 years or where the Romans were there, and then 10,000 years of the first real, villages and writing, and I actually writing was only 5,000 ago, and then go back 150,000 years, the first real tribes that looked like us. If you look at this span of time, which by the way is tiny compared to cosmic time,
mm,
100 years is
mm.
very little. What it
That's a good
means
point.
basically is get ready. We're on the cusp of this thing. Whether you
Mm,
are the first generation to experience it or the last generation to barely miss it or to have to use brain preservation to get there, we're on the cusp. This is going to be something quite new,
mm,
something very interesting, and it's going to be changing society a lot, I think. And we're really almost there. It's just like, when 100 years ago maybe people had no idea what the internet was going to be, but
mm,
even further, go back 200 years when they were starting to fly balloons, hot air balloons, they might have started imagining airplanes and how that could work, right?
mm,
And it's sort of similar where we can see what's going to happen and we know what's going to happen. It's
mm,
We're on the cusp of it, even if the number of decades isn't clear.
mm,
We're not talking about something that's 1,000 years away. It's not
mm.
like that.
Wow. Yeah, this is a subject that I know the least out of everything that's transhuman. I know the least about uploading it. I need to really. I'm gonna definitely do more research about it. Um, because it just seems such a complex thing. It seems so hard to imagine ha- your mind being transferred to a different this let's say virtual reality. It just seems so hard to imagine that we'll be able to. I know there's a lot of people who say that can't this is an impossible thing to do. Like I know it just seems
Yeah.
so difficult. Like if you're transferring the mind to a different subject, is that really you? That I know there's questions like that. And does the person is this just replacing parts of the brain and replicating its functions? Would that even make that? It just seems really difficult and really confusing
It
to me.
does, yeah. It's definitely takes a lot of thinking about, and it takes
Mm,
getting used to, and there's obviously a lot that we don't know yet.
right.
So this discussion about is it really me? Then people start comparing scenarios, like, okay, what if we just replace one neuron at a time,
Yeah.
versus what if we're doing a scan and then we build a copy over here? Is it different? Is that the same? Do they have the same outcome? And we can debate that. That's a whole other conversation,
Mm,
and it's kind of separate from the conversation about you know not which procedure, but whether you should do it at all and whether it's going to happen at all.
right.
um, so yeah, there's definitely a lot to get used to there. I find that also just contemplating things that might happen then that we're not used to,
Mm,
like branching scenarios where Right now, that just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen that you have one of yourself, and then tomorrow you decide that you're going to have five of yourself just
Mm,
because I mean, once you're uploaded, there's nothing that stops you from making as many copies as you could make, or maybe there's some regulations there. I don't know, but
mm,
you could. And then what does that mean? All these people share the same root, they have the same past, but they become different people. We've never dealt with something like that before. There's a whole ton of stuff that's
wow.
just unusual to think about,
Yeah.
and it takes a while to kind of think through what that could mean. But yeah,
Mm,
you've got an aspect of natural selection here, or just selection, let's just say, where even if you don't think it through, even if you don't decide that this is for you, or if I don't, or whomever doesn't,
mm,
um, if someone does,
mm,
if someone does it, and if it turns out that there are advantages, like that bit about memory or the speed of thinking and all of that stuff, then it's likely that that's going to gain traction. And then
mm,
you have those who choose to growing with that,
mm,
and those who chose not to not doing so.
mm,
And then it's kind of like, well, yeah, we have Amish in the world today,
mm.
but because they chose not to continue
Right.
progress in a sense, right? Because they didn't
Right.
want to continue with that. That wasn't part of where they wanted the world to go or how it should
Right.
be. But they're not, they're not the most influential group in the world. They're not the
Right.
ones who are really kind of guiding us along.
Mm,
And that's what you would see then if you have those
mm,
who get used to it, who choose to go along with that, or versus those who don't. And yes,
mm,
of course, I worry about all the ethical things that I don't have an answer for, like equal access for all,
mm.
and uh, and what happens if, I mean, who's developing this thing? What if it's the USA? What if it's China? What if it's Russia?
Yeah.
Who's the
Yeah.
first one to make it? What's it going to be like?
Mm,
It's looking at how the economy is going and how the world is developing. There's a pretty big likelihood that it might be China, right?
yeah.
Because their economy is growing pretty damn fast.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what are the effects of all of that?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. That would be a scary thing if another country develops it before. I mean, I know it
Well,
might
that's
have
kind
some.
of scary if the US does it too, because we don't have a
Yeah.
healthcare system. So then not everyone gets access at the same time.
Yeah. That's true. Um. Wow. Wow. Yeah. That's something to think. I didn't even think about that. Yeah. That would be. Hmm. Wow. We definitely will have to. We definitely have to change that. We definitely have to
Yep.
give people more access to medicine and healthcare. The universal healthcare. I'm definitely for that. Definitely. I want to see everybody healthy and wise. Um.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what argument speaks against that. It's not,
Yeah. It's
if
weird.
somebody's born more rich and someone's born less rich, it's not your fault where you're born. So
Right.
how can that be a determinant of what
Yeah.
opportunities you get and chances? So no, it's just silly. This
Yeah.
is a
This doesn't make
holdover of some
sense.
ancient power grabbing kind of attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This. Yo. Do you think that? All right. So I know what Neuralink, Elon Musk premises that artificial intelligence will become more super intelligent than humans. Does carbon copies have the same outlook that we just need to create um independent substrate minds because artificial intelligence may get ahead of humans as far
It's
as
not the
intelligence?
reason why we founded carbon copies. It's not
Mm,
my reason for doing it because, as we talked about, I have a much longer history of just wanting to do this, and other reasons like just the sort of advancement of humans.
no doubt.
Um, but but we certainly do think about it. I
Mm,
I don't really know exactly what to expect because I'm not an expert on AI, and I don't really know
mm,
the likelihoods of this AI scenario versus that AI
right.
scenario and how we fit into the whole thing. Um, so I can't say that I have a very well thought out plan for how to make this work with AI.
Mm,
What I mostly hope is that the development of AI, which is probably going to keep going pretty fast because it doesn't need to be like anyone. It doesn't have to be like a person. So it has
right.
that edge, right? And maybe it's sometime not an edge, because sometimes there's something to be had in all of this nitty gritty detail that we have in there. But it's entirely possible that something very powerful comes out of AI,
Mm,
in the much earlier than, say, whole brain emulation would be completed. And so in that
mm,
case, I certainly hope that the way it's developed keeps on giving us a good opportunity to keep on moving forward and eventually get to whole brain emulation as well. I don't want it to be the thing that stops us, that kind of
right.
replaces us just before we had a chance to get there ourselves too.
Mm,
Um, so I do worry about that a bit, not
mm,
too much, because I know that there are a lot of people already worrying about it, and many
yeah.
of them are my friends. So it's good to have friends who think about these things.
Right. Right.
Um, but yeah, I can't spend my mind on too many things at the same time.
No, I get it. Um, I just wanted to ask that. I had that on my list because I do. It's just the things that people are talking about with this. Everybody's talking about this neural lace situation and this artificial intelligence uh, outpacing humans and this doom and gloom type of situation. But
Yeah, that's true.
I know it's two different things, but it's kind of similar because you are talking about uploading us to virtual reality. I know that will be one of the independent substrates that we probably will be that will probably be investigated is uploading our consciousness to virtual reality, and I know that AI will have something to do with that. Right? Am I
Yeah.
right or wrong?
Um, yeah.
If you uploading or am I point me in the right direction? Am I? Because I'm not an expert on this, and I got an expert. I want to ask everything. I want to ask the dumbest stuff I can. I can so then we can get it out the way. But it doesn't that have to, isn't that correlate with like if you're uploading your brain to virtual reality? AI definitely has something to do with that, right?
Well, AI can help, and I mean AI. There's so many things called AI, right?
Mm,
Sometimes people will call what I guess is data science and machine learning AI. So the ability to quickly
okay, I
scrape
see.
through a bunch of data and pull out patterns and useful things. And that most certainly is a part of modern neuroscience. It's used all the time,
Mm,
even just for that, cubic millimeter project. It's a bunch of machine learning goes into that. Like, you don't want to be manually interpreting all of those images.
right.
Um, but yeah, what AI are we talking about here? The AI that people are worried about is AI that has that sets its own goals, or sets goals, or has goals, and then perhaps pursues those goals in a very dramatic way
Mm,
by improving itself over and over again, doing self
mm,
improvement. Um, yeah, I don't really know exactly how that ties into doing whole brain emulation. Like,
okay.
if there's yeah, I mean, maybe
So,
if you want AI scientists or something like that,
mm,
that could help. Yeah.
okay, I got you. Um, did you read Ray Kurzweil's books on how to build a brain? I forgot the name of the book. It escapes me.
Yeah, more than that, I was a reviewer.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
was before it was published, I was reviewing the pieces and sending back
oh
my
wow.
comments. He did not use any of them. Nope,
Oh
none of them. None of them.
wow.
Uh, but
Okay. Oh, wow.
anyway, so the yeah, I his book was is nice. It's kind of similar to what Numenta has been doing, their version of like how the prefrontal cortex works. It's
Mm,
all the same idea, which is basically in the prefrontal cortex, or the cortex, the part of the brain that we consider the most modern part of the brain, the one that um, that where we do all of our sort of goal directed thinking. That there, the unit that is important is basically a small collection of neurons, a little
mm,
population of neurons, not the individual neuron. And that these little pools of resources, if you can replicate lots of those, then you can build a system that can do smart stuff.
mm,
I don't think anyone really disagrees with that. That's
right.
yeah, like, yeah, Kurzweil's not the only one. There's Numenta,
Yeah.
and there's of course just basic neuroscience, all the study of the prefrontal cortex.
Right.
But it's not everything. Like, the prefrontal cortex does not do concept building. It does not
Mm,
do memory building. Like, you store patterns there, but you don't create episodic memories there. That's done in the hippocampus and other older limbic regions of the brain.
mm,
That's not in the cortex. And also, 20% to 30% of our brain is in the cortex.
Mm.
70% of all of our neurons are in the in the cerebellum, in the this sort of block that's underneath here on the bottom
Mm.
part of the brain. Now, that doesn't mean that those 70% are smarter than the other 20%. Those 70%
Mm.
are largely occupied with movement. So that's why, for instance, you'll see that a whale has a much larger brain than we do, even though they don't necessarily write Shakespeare. And that's because they have a very large body. So they have to do sensation, feeling across a very large body and driving a lot of
Mm.
muscles. And the same thing with the cerebellum having all those neurons. It's largely sensation, feeling everything on your skin everywhere, and being able to drive all your muscles.
Mm.
But there's also some other function that goes on there. So Kurzweil's book didn't touch on those parts of the brain, and it's funny that he is so enamored with the cortex and its function for intelligent thought when the examples he was giving about the sort of intelligence, the kind of things that that kind of intelligence can do, are the same things that you often see various birds do
Mm.
who do not have that part of the brain.
Right.
So,
I think I
yeah,
heard that before too. I
yeah.
think some. I don't know who I heard that from. Yeah. Wow. Wow. This is a very heady. I need to do my homework. I need to. Yeah. There was a. Do you recommend any books on uploading that I can read that I can just any books
Yeah.
that I can
I
any
mean, okay,
beginning books
so
that can bring me up to speed slowly, like that I can read
it
that I can
depends on
learn
what you're
more
most
about this
interested
subject.
in. It depends on what you're most interested in. Then there will probably be a few more interesting books coming up very shortly, actually.
Mm.
But but of the ones that are out there right now, if you're interested in the question of is it really me and consciousness and all those
Right.
scenarios about consciousness, streams of consciousness, and so forth, then you should buy the book A Metaphysics and Taxonomy
Oh, I seen
of
that.
Mind Uploading
Yeah,
by
I need
Keith
to get
Wiley.
that was on my list.
Yeah.
Okay, you just
And
confirmed me. I'm
other than
getting
that,
that.
there are also some really good papers by Michael Cirillo
Mm.
and again Keith Wiley and a few others.
Mm.
Uh, the it's a bit of a dry slog to go through the whole brain emulation roadmap document, but
I
that
was
one's
looking
also
through
out
that.
there if you want to read it. Um, let's see, other treatments. I think it would actually be very useful
Mm.
to read a little bit of philosophy, but in this
Mm.
case, Derek Parfit and his take on personal identity.
Mm.
So I think it's of reasons and persons, or persons and reason. I'm not. I don't
Yeah, that
remember
sounds
which way around it
familiar.
was, but yeah.
That book sounds.
Um,
Wow. Okay, because I need to. After talking to you, I know exactly what I don't know. After talking to Doctor, I was like, I don't know. This is a real heady subject, and I need to go because I have no in my library. I have no books about brain uploading. I have nothing about any of the the
it's
topics
still a
that we talked about today.
very underserved field in terms of books and all that other stuff. There's a lot
Yeah.
that still needs to be written.
Wow. Well, thank you for coming by. Is anything, any, if for anybody who wants to go on the same path that you have gone, what type of advice do you have for them? For anybody who wants to get into like some of the subjects we talked, some of the things we talked about whole
Well,
brain
first of all, I would
analyzation and
say make sure you dive in because a part of what mattered, at least in my case, was diving in wholeheartedly and being committed to it before you really know how hard it is.
mm,
Because when you're naive enough, then you have that ability to just dive in that way and not be discouraged.
mm,
And then you also need to have the tenacity to just stay put, or maybe it's stubbornness. I don't know. When you realize how hard it really is.
mm,
Um, and then on top of that, I guess yeah, read the details because there's so much vague hand waving that happens in
yeah, it's true.
topics like consciousness and personal identity and mind and claims that get thrown around. Like
Yeah.
you're, if you don't dig into the details, if you don't care enough to read up on the details, then it's very easy to just imagine something, but it has nothing to do with reality. We see this
Mm,
right now with conspiracy theories everywhere.
yeah,
Like,
that's another reason why
how
I
could
brought
you
you
believe
on.
those things if you ever like studied something carefully? That's impossible. But yeah,
Right.
you know. Um, so that mainly because not everybody wants to do the same thing. But I mean, you know, computational neuroscience or whatever.
Mm,
But those things, those general sort of attitudes or what to do, I think that's important.
mm. Yeah, because for anybody who wants to learn more about the brain, and they want to find out more about the brain and stuff like that, and you know one in the future want to study mind uploading, and want to do some of the things that you're doing now. I don't think there's no in my community. There's nobody talk. There's not too many people that's into mind uploading. If you bring it up to them, they're gonna say that it's an elite thing and it's a conspiracy for people to get over on other people. They don't know any. I don't really hear anything. They're not exposed to this information at
Hmm.
all, other than what Hollywood is doing. So that's another reason why I wanted to bring you on. Because I just want to get exposed different people to different things. I'm tired of seeing. I want to see more diversity in these um different fields, man. I want to see different people bringing different energy to these different fields, and not just the same. I want to expose us to more stuff than the average stuff that I see today. When I ask a kid today, what do you want to do? They say a rapper or entertainer. Like, why
Oh
not a
yeah.
neuroscientist? Like my brother Randal Koene.
Well,
Like
and
I want to hear that.
entertainers, being an entertainer isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I think a lot about what sort of things you can do in life that actually matter, where people would say in the end you actually made a difference. And
Mm,
um, it seems to me very often that it's anything that has ripples through time that really extends forward. And so if you're an entertainer, like think back to past entertainers, Mozart and whoever, that we still
mm,
remember them today. We remember what
that's
they
true.
did because they affected the world. And then in the same way, I think entertainers today can do that too. So I mean, sure, not everybody's going to be the one who does that. So
Mm,
yeah, it's not every entertainer, but that, and then scientists similarly, if they did change the world by coming up with something, discovering something, understanding something better, that's great.
mm,
Um, and I agree with you that yeah, just breaking through in different cultures and in different communities and
yeah.
getting ideas across is very important. And then you see an amplification of what we can do just by bringing new people in. It's
Mm,
like this avalanche, right? You have little pebbles rolling down, and then you get boulders after a while.
mm,
And it's the same thing. So that's why one of the things that we've really focused on at Carbon Copies is to try to become international, to be as international as possible. So we now have 85 team members, and
mm,
we're located not just in the US, but we have a lot of people in Europe and some people in Australia and in Asia. Unfortunately, we do not yet have any people from Africa or South America. I
wow.
don't know why that is,
Mm,
but eventually we'll get there. Eventually we'll have, some people from all around the world that are participating in this. We also have at the moment, which I think is not bad for something that is kind of in a STEM field, we have about 40% women and about 60% men in the
yeah, I seen
organization
that.
right now.
I seen that too.
So
I
that's
seen.
not perfectly balanced, but
It's
it's better
wonderful.
than it could be. Um, but yeah, I think it's important. I find that it really does help. It makes us richer.
Mm,
And I've even seen this in science labs. Like in a science lab, if you have a more balanced science lab
mm,
in a university, where you bring in people from different backgrounds and different communities or different genders or gender identifications, that typically your lab, it just flourishes, right?
mm,
And in science, and if it's always the same think about the same thing,
mm,
everybody's thinking the same way because they have the same background, the same experience, you're just not getting as much.
mm.
So yeah, spreading the word, getting more people interested is super important.
Yeah,
That's
because I'm a
why
hip hopper
outreach
and I
is a
want to
part
see
of what
more
we
hip
do.
hoppers get into mono. That's what I really like to see. Some kids say, "Yeah, I'm a hip hopper and I'm going to school for neuroscience, and I want to lay down the bricks to help the future find out how we're gonna be able to mine upload. I want to see that. I would love to see that. Um, Thanks for coming by. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed this discussion, even though I didn't know much about it. I've got school today. I'm gonna go back and learn more, and I'm gonna have Dr. Randal Koene come back on the show once I get up to speed and know more about the mine uploading thing. I need to really do my homework. I'm gonna see you six. Give me 6 months, Dr. Randal Koene. 6 months.
Oh yeah,
My
okay, I'll hold you
information
to it.
will increase incredibly by. So give me 6 months. Okay, I'm gonna go back to your site, read as much as I can, and I'm gonna get that book on. It's called Taxonomy. Uploading Mind
Yeah,
Taxonomy,
a metaphysics,
metaphysics.
so the philosophy, a
Right.
metaphysics and taxonomy of mind uploading.
That's crazy that they would even put metaphysics and mind uploading in the same
I think
sentence.
that the title is way too long. It's not helpful.
Yeah,
But you know,
but
who am I to criticize Keith? He does a good job.
I seen it on Amazon. It's like I was like I had to get this because it's the only book I've seen that was on your on carbon copies. I didn't see any other stuff on the
Yeah,
suggested
we should
reading
actually
as
make
far
that
as
better.
books is
There are a
concerned.
few more things that we should put on there, some more readings, but we've
Okay.
really still got a lot of work to do on our website just to get it to where we want it to be. So, bit by bit.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you, man. Have a great night. Um, I'll send you the link, and I'm probably gonna upload this tomorrow in the evening.
Fantastic. Okay, thank
Okay.
you very much. It was really a pleasure. Enjoyed our conversation a lot.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah,
Thank you very much, Dr.
six
Randall
months.
Cohen.
Glad to see you then again. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. 6 months. I'm gonna see you again.
Let's do it.
Okay. Peace.